We're talking about busting the no carbs myth. If you have diabetes, you probably heard at some point, can't have any carbs. And there's all these diets that came out. You've probably heard, don't eat any carbs, this and that, no carbs, carbs are bad. And so that's true to a point. There's always truth and there's always falsehood. So we're going to go over what's true about that and what is not true. There are definitely different kinds of carbs, okay? And so I think the confusion comes in which carbs to eat and which carbs not to eat, because not all carbs are bad. Let's start off with talking about the categories of carbs that we have. So there's three main categories. There's the starches. This includes things like beans, legumes, whole grains. Those are starches. And then there's sugar. And so that includes added sugars. Okay, so manufactured sugar, granulated sugar, any kind of added sugar. If you have to add sugar to something to make it sweet, that is considered added sugar, even if it's a natural thing, like honey. If you add it to something, then it's an added sugar. We also have natural sugars, and so that's sugar that comes naturally with stuff. So, for example, fruits have sugar in them, and some vegetables have sugar in them too. And then our third category is fiber, and that includes nuts, fruits, vegetables, legumes, beans. It pretty much includes all the categories of plant-based foods. Okay, so those are the three main kinds of carbs. We do have some carbs that are recommended for people with diabetes to avoid or really limit in the diet, because they lead to problems with blood sugars and other health problems, actually. So we're talking about refined sugar. This is sugar that's been processed. It's been extracted from the food and refined and turned into something that's not quite healthy, so very little amounts. And if you remember from prior trainings, the American Heart Association recommends a maximum of 9 tablespoons of, not tablespoons, teaspoons of sugar for the adult male, and 6 teaspoons of sugar or less for the adult female, maximum daily. And just because that's the max doesn't mean that we all have to get to our max. And that's for everybody, regardless of what their health status is, including diabetes. So that's really not a whole lot of sugar. We have refined carbohydrates. So these are carbohydrates that have been taken and processed, and the healthy parts, so the fiber, has been taken off. So for example, white flour, it comes from whole wheat flour, but they've taken off all the bran and grain and fiber, and we're left with the highly processed white flour that now has all of the fiber gone. And we're going to get into why fiber is important here in a second. So that's refined carbs, things like white rice. That's, again, rice that has been refined. So brown rice hasn't been refined, so they haven't taken off all the fiber, and fiber is useful. Cakes, cookies, candies, all those type of things. Those are things that are refined and don't have a lot of nutritional value. And the problem is these type of carbs, so refined carbs and refined sugars, they lead to problems with increased insulin resistance because of how they affect our body. And with increased insulin resistance, that leads to the risk for diabetes. Which kind of carbs are good carbs then, if not all carbs are bad? So it's going to be plant-based foods. Plant-based carbs are actually really good because they have other benefits. Okay, they've got several different health benefits. One is that a lot of them are lower on the glycemic index. And what is the glycemic index? It's just basically how long it takes the body to break down the carbs and how it affects the blood sugar. So foods with a high glycemic index, they're broken down really quickly and they lead to blood sugar spikes. But things that are lower on the glycemic index don't do that. They're slower. They cause a slower rise in blood sugar after meals. And this prevents blood sugar spikes or drops, and it helps to kind of manage blood sugars and keep them controlled at a steady level. So that's one benefit there. Plant-based foods have been shown to decrease the risk of chronic diseases like diabetes, heart disease, cancer, just to mention a few. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail. But fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, and things like that, that are all part of a plant-based diet, contain essential nutrients and fiber, antioxidants, and things that are needed and that are actually beneficial for different processes, including diabetes. And there's like minerals like magnesium and potassium. Magnesium actually has been found in studies to help improve insulin sensitivity, and it's also involved in glucose metabolism. It's involved in several different processes in the body, but it does help with diabetes, and studies have found that it can help to prevent progression to diabetes in people who are pre-diabetic. And so foods that are high in magnesium include things like dark green leafy vegetables, legumes and beans like lentils, garbanzos, nuts and seeds like sunflower seeds, almonds, and walnuts. And so there are some things that are not plant-based that have magnesium too, but we're busy talking about carbohydrates that are good for us. We're talking about plant-based things. Carbohydrates that tend to be not good are the refined carbohydrates and highly processed ones. And the ones that are healthier are the natural ones that haven't been processed at all. Another benefit is that they are lower in saturated fats, which are found in things like red meat and processed meat, which have a higher risk for chronic diseases, including heart disease and diabetes. So decreasing those in the diet is beneficial. Doesn't mean that you have to become vegetarian or anything. Plant-based diets also help with weight management. That's because there's lots of fiber in these diets, and fiber helps you feel fuller faster and doesn't have that much calories. So that's another benefit to these kinds of carbohydrates. Another thing is that they're lower in cholesterol and saturated fat, like I said, which helps to prevent progression of heart disease. And diabetes in and of itself independently is an independent risk factor for heart disease, not to mention other risk factors for heart disease like obesity. And if you combine these things, then the more of these risk factors one has, the higher the risk one has for, say, heart disease. Like if you have diabetes, you have obesity, and then family history of heart disease. Those are 3 risk factors. So you're 3 times more likely to get heart disease based on those risk factors. Nuts and seeds, which also have lots of fiber in them and are considered good carbs, have lots of omega-3 fatty acids, which are good fats, which help to decrease inflammation. And part of heart disease happens because of inflammation that occurs in the blood vessels, where saturated fats contribute to that inflammation. So bottom line is, not all carbs are bad. Not to say that as a diabetic, you still don't need to watch the carbs, the amount of carbs that you're eating. You can have carbs. Watch the amount of carbs that you're eating based on whatever diet plan that you're on, that you've come up with your healthcare provider. But with the carbs that you do eat the healthy carbs, and then you get all these health benefits that we talked about already. And when you run into problems is when you're doing the unhealthy carbs. But not all carbs are bad. So people with diabetes can have carbohydrates. It just depends on the kind of carbohydrate. And remember, the American Diabetes Association recommends the diabetic plate to be 9 inches wide or less, okay? Half of your plate should be non-starchy vegetables, kale, broccoli, asparagus, dark green leafy things. Quarter of your plate can be starches and carbohydrates, so things like corn, oats, whole grains, 1/4 of your plate, and then the other 1/4 of your plate, lean protein. All right, so not all carbs are bad, guys.